The Benefits of Extensive Reading, Part 2, by Joseph Polshock, PhD. Okay, so in Part 1, we saw that extensive reading is big, easy, and enjoyable. And in this section, Part 2, we will see how ER helps make for masterful English. Okay, so the word masterful is an acronym in this talk. ER makes for masterful English. So M stands for motivation. ER motivates reading and learning. A stands for attitude. ER improves attitudes. S stands for syntax. ER develops learner syntax and grammar. T stands for thinking, especially ER improves thinking in the sense of writing. And then E stands for ears. ER benefits listening skills. R stands for riches. ER enriches physical, emotional, and intellectual life. And F stands for fluency. ER increases reading automaticity and fluency. And U stands for ubertext. That is, ER employs the supreme form of content, namely stories. So stories are ubertexts. And L stands for Lexis. ER improves vocabulary and word knowledge. So first of all, let's look at the letter M, motivation. So ER motivates readers. Proof? Well, we love books. Harry Potter, for example, has sold over 400 million copies. And J.K. Rowling is the first billionaire author. Now, of course, ER books are not the same as Harry Potter books, but there are good ones. There are good books that we can read easily for extensive reading. And books are very popular in the world today. Reading is a big thing. It's big business. So people are motivated to read. Of course, ER is primarily, but not only, pleasure reading. So pleasure reading is motivating. Here's a quote from Nell, 1988. Pleasure reading is a form of play. It is free activity standing outside ordinary life. It absorbs the player completely. So in this sense, ER is play, and play motivates. By the way, you can find references to this talk at ilinguist.net. Okay, M stands for motivation. So learners find graded text interesting and enjoyable. The interest and enjoyment affects learners. It motivates them to read. And I've seen this in my research in 2010. M for motivation. Krashen has announced the end of motivation in second language acquisition studies. Of course, this is a polemical statement. It's very extreme. But what he's saying is that we don't need to cajole or push students to learn English. If we give them compelling input, compelling stories that just simply motivates them to read and enjoy them, then second language acquisition will just happen. So that's what he means when he says it's the end of motivation. If we can give students compelling, interesting content that naturally motivates them to read, then we don't need to try to motivate them. It happens naturally. M for motivation. Of course, motivation is psychologically complex. If you look at research on motivation, it's complicated. But we must never lose sight of its simple side, and that's this. We love stories. We are motivated to read stories. So the love of stories is the key point of this section on motivation. The next is A for attitude. Motivation concerns what moves students to do extensive reading, but attitude concerns how students evaluate extensive reading. So, for example, ER decreases anxiety and increases comfort. This is from research from Yamashita, 2013. And reluctant readers who disliked English appraise or evaluate reading and English more positively after doing extensive reading. This is from research from Takase, 2012. A is for attitude. Home run books can spark interest in continued reading. This is from Trelease, 2001. The idea is that if you find a book that sort of is like a home run experience, it can motivate you to continue to read. It gives you a new attitude, a new way of evaluating your experience of reading. A home run book can change your attitude about reading. Learners appraise ER as more enjoyable and beneficial than grammar instruction for language acquisition. So this is from research by Dupee, 1997. And she's shown that students appreciate, enjoy, evaluate extensive reading more positively than they do grammar instruction. Okay, S stands for syntax. Well, speaking of syntax, students like to do extensive reading more than grammar study, but ER also can beat some of the glaring weaknesses of most grammatical syllabi, and that is In many grammatical syllabi, grammatical elements are not recycled and not repeated over the course of a semester. So if you miss the class where the teacher talks about the past tense, you'll never get to study it again perhaps. But ER allows readers to naturally do retrieval, spaced review, and interleaving of grammatical features. So when we say interleaving of grammatical features, it means that they get to see lots of different grammatical features in one text. They're mixed. Interleaving means mixed. So the grammatical features are mixed. They're space reviewed, so they see them over periods of time, repetition over periods of time, and they get to retrieve them in that way as well. And they do this all while reading for pleasure. So in one sense, extensive reading is the enjoyable way to naturally acquire grammar. S stands for syntax. ER by itself can help increase standardized test scores. Mr. quote-unquote Tanaka increased 180 points on the TOEIC after 217 hours of ER and 30 hours of ER listening. He did no grammatical study, and so on the TOEIC he increased 0.73 points per hour. So that's pretty amazing results. It's a case study, but it seems to indicate an overall pattern, and that's from Mason, 2011. S stands for syntax. Extensive reading can correlate highly with TOEFL performance. So for 101 pre-university ESL students, extracurricular reading, that is extensive reading, correlated most highly with TOEFL performance. So that's basically saying that Gradman and Hanania said that those who read the most got the best scores on their TOEFL. All right, so that's syntax. S is for syntax, and T stands for thinking, and that's another way of talking about writing. So writing is thinking on paper, thinking with your pencil or your computer. Here's what Stephen King says. If you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that. So the point is that good writers and thinkers are good readers. T is for thinking or writing. So can playful ER improve reading and writing skills? That's a simple question. And Hafiz and Tudor in 1989 did a 3-month ER experiment, and, quote, the results showed a marked improvement in the performance of the experimental subjects, especially in terms of their writing skills. So those who read a lot improved their writing skills. So extensive reading is good for writing. If you want to be a good writer, you need to be a big reader. The next one is E for listening. All right? So extensive reading helps you improve your listening, helps you improve your ears. Now you might hear an objection here from a student. Hey, wait a minute. I want to learn listening and speaking, not just reading. I want to learn listening and speaking, not just reading. I've heard students say that. That's a typical objection. So the question is, can a book, this is a picture from Hear the Pied Piper of Hamelin and other classics, a Penguin book. Can a book, a story from a book, get into your ears? And so the facts are more encouraging than our skepticism. With Ailey's 1992 famous book flood research done in 103 schools in Singapore, experimental students outperformed control students in vocabulary, grammar, reading, writing, and listening comprehension. So in this big study by Ailey, the basic point I want to make here is that, yes, extensive reading can improve or does correlate with increased listening comprehension. Extensive reading can help you be a better listener, have better listening skills. All right? So, of course, listening and reading have an organic relationship, right? Reading can build a foundation for listening. And, of course, we can read aloud and listen to audiobooks. So, extensive reading does relate to listening. Of course, students need to listen to things as well, but reading alone can also help listening skills. So, E stands for ears, that is listening. The next one is R, which equals riches. We usually think of the linguistic benefits of extensive reading. Language teachers often talk about the linguistic benefits. But extensive reading enriches physical, emotional, and intellectual life. If all children in low-income countries gained reading skills in school, 100 million people would leave poverty. This is from the MPO Room to Read, and you can read about this at roomtoread.org. R equals riches. So good readers get better jobs. Poor readers find it harder to better their careers. Here's the reference there. I can't actually pronounce that name. Literacy improves health and gender equality for women, and you can see that reference as well. So yes, extensive reading brings riches. Okay, R equals riches. Good readers get practical or better practical knowledge, bigger vocabularies, more general intelligence, and this is from very famous research from Stenovich and Cunningham. I would definitely recommend reading those. R equals riches. Good readers of narrative fiction can grow emotional intelligence, a sense of empathy, and a theory of mind. That means they can better understand what others are thinking. There's a lot of research about how extensive reading of fiction can help improve emotional intelligence. So that's R equals riches. The next one is F for fluency. Now there are three kinds of ESL and EFL reading. There's intensive reading, where we read short texts to gain an understanding of grammar, vocabulary, or discourse. For example, what does the it refer to in a text, or the they refer to? That's intensive reading. Then there's extensive reading for pleasure. That's 2A, and then 2B, extensive reading for fluency. And basically, when we talk about fluency, we're developing fluency through a program of speed reading activities. So many SEFL students, for example, in Japan, may read, at university that is, may read around 100 words per minute. But they can get to 200 words per minute over the period of time in a short speed reading course. And in paired read alouds, we can see immediate fluency gains. For example, two students sit together and one student starts to read a text for 1 minute, then they stop, and then if they start over from the beginning of the text and read again for 1 minute, they will read more the second time. Here's an example of a text that you could use in a speed reading course. This is a boasis.com step 1 text, so it's very easy. The students read it, and while they read it, they're being timed. When they finish reading, they mark their time on the in the blanks under B, and they can also circle the time below in the chart and see their reading speed. And if they do this over the semester, for example, 10 times or so, they usually will see their reading speed increase quite a bit. So F stands for fluency, improving the speed of reading. U is a word that I may have coined. It's ubertext. So ER employs a supreme form of textual content, namely stories. Stories match our Darwinian desires to survive and reproduce. Stories are cross-culturally universal, species-typical phenomena, and we better recall information in story form. Stories are psychologically privileged. That means that our brains are naturally inclined to enjoy stories. Stories match our cognitive preferences for narrative-like episodic memory. So there are many reasons why we think stories are great. Story has a master formula. There's character plus predicament plus attempted extrication. So you have a character who faces conflict and tries to get out of it, and the key element is conflict. And so with extensive reading, learners can experience the power of ubertext for content and language learning. Stories are a great way to engage learners and help them enjoy English, but also learn a lot in the process. So U stands for ubertext or stories. And our last one is L for Lexis. So Lexis stands for vocabulary. We can acquire enough Lexis by reading alone. That's Krashen's famous claim. And he's right. If we read millions of words at a good speed, perhaps at 150 words a minute, we can learn thousands of words by reading alone. Cobb says there are too many words and not enough time. So sometimes students don't have enough time to read millions of words. So he suggests that we do direct vocabulary study. And he's right too, for most students don't read that much. The answer, I think, is that we can do both. But my point is that by extensive reading, students can learn lots of vocabulary incidentally, and that's one of the benefits of extensive reading. So that's it. As we talked about in part 1, extensive reading is a reading B. It's big, easy, and enjoyable. And the word masterful reminds us of the benefits of extensive reading. Extensive reading is the cornerstone of a good language course and the most important improvement we can make to our individual and programmatical language learning paths. So that's the benefits of extensive reading, part 2, by yours truly, Joseph Polshock, PhD.